Okay, welcome to Lecture 2 for EDD 939 Module 5, looking at this component of strategic leadership and strategic thinking. And what we want to cover in this lecture is this aspect of planning. And as I said in the first lecture, talking about servant leadership, we never want to lose sight of the human component that goes in with strategic leadership. Strategic leadership, strategic thinking, planning, all of those things, if we're not careful, can feel somewhat cold and calculating. We can almost forget about the people involved. And especially, I think, in the planning process, because planning tends to look at a lot of data. And what we can do is we can forget that there are people behind those numbers, or those numbers represent people. So that's why I wanted to start with that aspect of servant leadership, as well as the reminder from servant leadership that a servant leader and a strategic leader and a strategic thinker, they're thinking about now and future. And as we talk about planning in this lecture, it's going to be very easy to only think about future, because this part is what really ties into the stereotype and the preconceived notion that most of us have of strategic leadership, strategic thinking, strategic planning, and that is 3 to 5 year plan, right? Show me your 3 to 5 year plan, and then that's what we mean by planning and strategic planning. And so that's definitely part of it. I mean, what we're going to be looking at here as we talk about planning, there is a long-term component to it. Some of it, as we get further down and we talk about scenario planning, or scenario planning, depending on how you want to say it. But when we look at that may even extend beyond 5 years. So that can be really long-term. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that planning also happens in the moment, or in more short term. I'm not going to spend time walking you through it, because it's a process that not a lot of people use. I've found I've only known one person who's ever used this process, but it's a fascinating concept that really applies more in it's better used for sales and things like that. But it basically puts your entire year on 90-day cycles, and each 90 days is viewed as a year. It's called periodization. A guy wrote a book on it. It's not a very long book, and a vice president that I worked with at State Farm, he used periodization in his area. And so all the agents under him were expected to abide by this. What periodization does, I think, in a good way, is by compressing things. So each 3 months you view as a year. And the whole point of periodization, and where it ties into helping us more in the short term, is too often when we view it as a year, I'm not even talking 3 to 5, just even 1 year. But what we can do is, and this especially happens in sales, I set sales goals for the year, right? And let's say we start on the calendar year. I don't have too much fire lit under me January, February rolling on. Then all of a sudden September comes and it's, oh man, I'm really behind on my sales goals, right? And I may have hit my monthly goals enough, but I'm behind. Now all of a sudden I got to get crazy for the rest of the year. And then you may or may not hit it. And so what periodization is, it compresses everything. So each 30 days, each 90 days is a year. And when you do that, the accountability gets a lot tighter. And it actually helps you with planning, and you accomplish more in an efficient way. So it's an interesting concept. And I just bring that up to show you there are lots of different ways to go about planning. And it's also a great example, I think, of where if you are in a leadership position, you can use different ways of planning and strategy and things, even within the concept of the broader organization. Because Terry, that was the name of this vice president, he is part of State Farm Insurance as a whole, which is a national organization. And then within that, he's part of the Heartland Zone, which is 6 states. And so State Farm as a whole didn't use this concept of periodization. They had annual planning, and then 3 to 5 years. And so he had to participate in that. But then for his area, for the agents who are all under him, he utilized this. And again, I just use that as an example where as you are leading groups, you can use a variety of different ways to keep people on task and to plan out and think through things. I mean, let's be honest, for those of us in education, we tend to do a lot of planning based on semesters. And I remember when I shifted my first time from teaching high school to then working in the corporate environment, I did retool some thinking because I wasn't used to thinking in terms of calendar year. I was more used to thinking, if anything, academic year, but especially semester by semester. And so we can plan and do things like that. We have that freedom. So I'm going to just show you kind of a broad general, it's not a planning system or strategy per se, but I want to show you how the different components work together in this module. So you have there the slide that says the elements of planning, and that's what we're really looking at here, the different elements of planning as I kind of have been taught it over the years. And it starts with your vision. And I should say this before I go too far. People have some different terms, and they may even switch, for instance, goals and objectives. I'm not taking a hardline stance on that. This is how I was taught it, which is objectives are broader than goals. Other people will argue and say, no, goals are broader than objectives. Fine. I don't need to argue with you about that. Whichever term, as long as you understand what goes in there, and then it'll make sense to you. But what you want to start off with is the vision, right? And so we talked about the organization's vision. They have this vision statement. It's going to be aspirational in nature. And so if we're talking about planning at the organizational level, so for right now we're going to talk about that. Here in a couple of lectures we're going to talk about visioning, and we'll apply it a little bit more maybe just to your unit or team. But for right now, let's just keep it at the organizational level. It'll be easier, and then you can make application in your mind to smaller work groups. So we have the organizational vision, right? It's an aspirational statement saying we want to be this organization, this school, this college, this whatever. And so we take that vision then, and then we start breaking it down. Because while the vision is aspirational and inspirational, it also needs to be, and I think I said this in the lecture when we talked about vision. If I didn't, I should have. Shame on me, so I'll say it now. The vision should also be achievable, right? It should be something that we could achieve. Now, it's aspirational from the standpoint of we may never achieve it, and that's okay. It's okay because if we even get close to it, right, we're doing really, really well. But it should be somewhat achievable. And so the vision then, and the reason I make a big deal about that now is because now we're going to break it down into that next step, which are objectives. And objectives are kind of broader, and I'm going to do what I just mentioned. They're broader goals. Goals is just an easier word for us to think of. But the objectives are pretty high level. So if this is our vision, what are our objectives that we can use that show us we're making progress? Because to a certain extent, that's what all of these things are in the elements of planning. They're helping us know, are we on our way? Can we tick these things off or check these things off and say, yep, we are moving, we're advancing toward that vision. And I'm going to give you a tangible example here in just a minute that hopefully will help you even more. So you have the objectives. And then from the objectives, you have goals. And your goals are kind of that next step down. And typically the idea is this. From the vision, you might have 1, 2, or 3 objectives. You're not going to have, 25 objectives. You can't accomplish that. It's too much. You might have 2 or 3 objectives. And I just put 2 in there. And then from each objective, you're going to have 2 or 3 goals. You don't, for you personally, if you've ever done any work with goal setting, what do we tell people with goal setting? We say 3 to 5 goals at the most. Because, and I've worked with people on individual development plans when I was a leadership coach, worked with them on their individual, and they're the high achievers, right? And so it's like, well, how many goals should I have? I said, well, everybody says 3 to 5 is about right. Well, then I'm going to have 7. Why? Well, because, it's like, I'm going to overachieve. No, you're going to kill yourself. And actually what you end up doing is, what the research shows us, is you can't focus on that many goals, and so then you actually just deflate yourself. You actually discourage yourself. And I've seen this from an organizational standpoint. So that's why you only want 2 or 3 objectives, big, and then you have your goals. And the objectives, if you've done any reading with Jim Collins, Good to Great, Built to Last, he calls these, he uses the term goals for objectives, but he would call those BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. That would be objectives. That's what I'm talking about here. If you're familiar with Jim Collins' work, maybe you chose to read one of his books for your book report. But big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs. That's what Jim Collins is talking about. Those are those big things that we're shooting for. And then from there, again, from each objective, we're going to have 2 or 3 goals that help us start working towards that objective, right? And then from the goals, from each goal, you're going to have a few strategies. Strategies are, how are we going to achieve the goals? And then the goals show us that we're making progress towards our objectives. And if we achieve our objectives, then we're moving towards that vision. You're seeing how it all works? And then finally, we have tactics. Tactics are the actual, very tangible day-to-day activities that we engage in order to carry out our strategy, to meet our goals, to then meet our objectives. Hopefully that's all making sense. So, and I'm going to give you another example in a minute, but this is one as well that is very personal, I think, for you. You have a vision to complete your doctoral program, right? And you say, well, that's my goal. Well, for our terminology here, that's your vision. Your vision is to, or maybe this is a better way. I just rethought this. Sorry, I'm going to change on the spur of the moment. Your vision is to become an administrator in a higher education setting. Let's say that's your vision for yourself. And again, you say, well, that's a goal. Yeah, but it's aspirational. It's kind of far down the road maybe for you. So your vision is to become to hold an administrative position in a higher education setting. So what are your objectives in order to achieve that vision? Well, one of those objectives is you need to earn a terminal degree, right? So objective, and there might be others, but we're going to ignore those for right now. We're going to just stick with one. So one objective, earn terminal degree. You've enrolled in I'm getting ahead of my objective, right? So then goal. What are the goals underneath there? Well, the goals would be to complete, the different aspects of the EDD program. Strategies, right? Strategy is, well, I need to get accepted. So what are your tactics? Your tactics are research, apply. Do you follow me? So my tactic is today, and that may show up on my to-do list for the day. What's my tactic for today? And I realize all of you are now in that spot, but your tactic is, all right, research EDD programs. You check, did that. And research EDD programs, narrow the list to 3. Check, you did that. The next day, narrow list, or rank list of 3 to my top choices. Check, did that. Apply to top choice. Let's say Clarkson was your top choice. I hope we were, and you applied, and then you were accepted, right? So now that strategy of getting into an EDD program is complete, or that goal is complete, because the strategy was to work through the process and you had daily tactics. So that one's now done. And now your other goals are complete required coursework, complete dissertation, and then you break that down into your strategies and your tactics. I hope that helps you understand where I'm going with this. What we're doing is, through planning, we're making a big thing achievable. Because I'll give you another example of this, an illustration. My brother, several years ago, it's been like 11 years ago or so, I think, he climbed Mount Rainier out in Washington State. If you're not familiar with Mount Rainier, it's the most challenging peak in the lower 48. A lot of people use it because it's glacier covered year round. So a lot of people actually use it as training ground for Everest. So I mean, you have to go through training, and you have to have a guide. I mean, it isn't just let me throw on my day pack and hike up this mountain. It's because of the weather pattern. It's not high enough to require oxygen or anything, but it's thinner air, but it can be very dangerous. So it requires a lot of planning, preparation, and training. And so my brother decided he wanted to do this. And so, because he got to talking to a guy who was a guide, and he got to know him, and he said, hey, I'll take you up now here's what you need to do. And so my brother Trevor went through months of preparation. He got down to probably his lowest, body mass index he's ever been at. He was being very careful what he ate and managing all of that. My brother's a big researcher, so when he throws himself into something, he throws himself into it. Very fit, did all kinds of training on, self-rescuing with, full blown. And it was a lot of hard work. And like I said, a lot of it was physical. So lots of hikes with packs on and running and everything else. He was in pretty peak physical condition before he went. And the week before he flew out he lives in Iowa. So the week before he flew out to Washington to go do this, he was talking to some guys, and one of the guys looked at him and he said, what you do is you hike up a certain way, you spend the night, and then you summit early morning so you can be there when the sun rises. So my brother, guys were asking him, and he was telling about it. And this one guy said, oh man, he said, I would love to be standing with you on the summit of Mount Rainier when the sun comes up. And my brother looked at him and he said, well, I can tell you how to get there. Right? I can tell you how you can do that. Well, not with me because I'm leaving in a week, but I can tell you how you can see the sunrise on Mount Rainier. And then he looked at the guy and said, but the question is, do you want to do it? And I think of that when I think of planning, right? And so you have to break it down, because a lot of us probably would sit back and go, oh, I'd love to see the sunrise on Mount Rainier. Vision. How am I going to get there? Well, then you got to break it into objectives, goals, strategies, tactics, and there's different parts of it. It might be finding a guide. Now, for my brother, he that was already given because he knew this guy. But there's finances involved, right? Depending on how much disposable income you have and things that you may need to save up for it or things like that. All of these, we do this with vacations. We do it with all kinds of things all the time. We just don't realize it. And then all of a sudden planning becomes this mysterious crystal ball thing when we step it into the organizational aspect. Think about the last time you planned a family vacation. You probably went through many of these steps. I doubt any of you, unless you're real crazy spur of the moment people, but if it's this can work for a weekend, but I'm talking about big vacation. I'm going to Hawaii or Disney World or something like that. I doubt any of you wake up in the morning and you go, I think we should go to Hawaii today. Let's go to Hawaii. Grab your luggage, throw it in, fly over there, right? We don't do that. If we're going to take a trip like that, we're planning it out. Or Europe, I feel like going to Ireland today. You get the idea. So then look at the example there, and hopefully this will help as well. But the example I have for you in this context is college football. So, and I'm not a football expert, but I think maybe this will help you understand. So, let's say, and so looking back up at the elements of planning, let's say the vision is to have, we aspire, right? Our aspirational is to be a top tier college football program in the United States, right? That's in general. So then we break it down. So let's say one of our objectives is this, to be a consistently ranked top 15 team. They preseason and then throughout the college football season, they have the top 25. Well, we want to be, our objective is to be in the top 15 every season, right? That's our objective. Okay, well, what are the goals that we need to accomplish to then achieve that objective? If we're going to be in the top 15, one of those goals might be to win the division championship. It might be to win the conference championship. Maybe to win the national championship. But let's go back to, we want to, one of our goals then is to consistently win our conference championship. And if you have divisions and then those are split into, or, you have your division, then you have your conference. So to consistently win our conference championship, like Big 10, Big 12, things like that. Okay, so that's our goal. Well, what's a strategy that's going to help us get to that goal? Well, a strategy is to have a top recruiting class each year. Okay, so we need to have good recruiting classes coming in each year. So then what are the tactics that we would engage in order to get a top? And now I'm breaking it down into what I can, if I'm the head coach or I'm the director of recruitment, I can say, here's what you need to do. All right, you go do this, you go do this, you go do this. Why? Because we have tactics. That's the idea behind planning. It's a simple illustration, and I'm sure I butchered it a little bit, but you get the idea. What planning does is it helps us break down this really big vision into achievable steps today. Now I'm going to wrap up here, and then we'll talk about scenario planning in the next lecture. But the danger that I see a lot of times in planning is this. Organizations who aren't used to planning, what they tend to do is they look at the tactics, they look at the things that they are doing right now, and then they draft goals to fit their tactics. You never want to do that. The tactics should be driven from the top down. And I don't mean hierarchy, I mean by vision, objectives, goals, strategies, tactics. But what I see a lot of times is, well, what's your goal? Well, here's what I'm doing today. Okay, I didn't ask you what you were doing today. I'm asking you what your goal is. Because what you're doing today may or may not be the right thing to get you to your goal. So what's your goal, or your vision, objective, those kind of things. So we want to make sure when we're doing planning that we are working from the top down. So don't do a scan and say, tell me what your tactics are. First we want to do this planning. Then we go, if we're already in existence, then we go, okay, now tell me what you're doing. Okay, this is what you're doing. Does that help us get to where we want to go? If not, we need to stop doing it, right? If it doesn't make sense and it's not getting us where we need to go, and it's, again, I realize in every organization there's stuff you just have to do. It may not helping us achieve our vision, but it's just, compliance, things like that. Well, I'm talking about other things. Does that help us get there? If not, let's stop doing it. Right? So that's a key part of planning as well. All right. So ran out of time in this video. We'll talk about scenario planning in the next video. That one will probably be a little bit shorter. We'll see you then.